She said it after midnight like it was nothing. No anger, no explanation, just one sentence. The kind you don't argue with. I didn't reply, not because I was shocked, but because I finally understood who she wasn't talking to anymore. Before the story goes any further, if you're listening and you value real slow burn stories about marriage, trust, and the quiet moments that change everything, take a second to subscribe. These aren't clips, they're lives. And this one took years to understand. It was past midnight. The house already settled into that shallow sleep where everything sounds louder than it should. The refrigerator hummed. A pipe clicked in the wall. I was sitting at the kitchen table, not waiting for her exactly, just not ready to go to bed without knowing she was home. That had been my habit for years. Madison came in without turning on the overhead light, kicked off her shoes carefully, like she didn't want to wake the house, like the house mattered more than I did. She poured herself a glass of water, took 2 slow sips, and then said it. One sentence. Calm, almost considerate. The kind of tone you use when you're telling someone you'll be late for dinner tomorrow. We should stop pretending this is working. That was it. No build-up, no pause to see how it landed. I didn't answer. I didn't nod. I didn't ask what she meant. I stayed still, hands folded on the table, staring at a small crack in the wood I'd fixed once and never quite sanded down. I could feel my heart doing something strange, not racing, not sinking, just reorganizing itself around a truth it had been avoiding. She waited a few seconds, maybe expecting something. A question, a reaction, a defense. When none came, she shrugged slightly, like this was just another item crossed off a list, and went upstairs. I stayed there long after the sound of the shower started, and in that quiet, I realized the sentence hadn't come from nowhere. It was the final line of a conversation she'd been having without me for a long time. Our marriage hadn't exploded. It had thinned slowly, politely. We were still functional. We paid bills. We hosted holidays. We told the same stories to the same friends. But somewhere along the way, I had been reassigned. Not fired, just moved out of the room where decisions were made. It happened in pieces so small, I barely noticed them. Her phone always face down. New phrases she never used before. I just need space. You're overthinking. Can we not do this right now? She stopped asking my opinion on things that used to be ours, trips, money, even what we did on weekends. She'd informed me instead, like a memo. I told myself this was normal. Long marriages change shape. Everyone says that. I told myself being steady was a virtue, that not pushing was respectful, that love meant giving room. What I didn't see was that the room I gave was being furnished for someone else. Looking back, the humiliations weren't loud. They were quiet adjustments. She'd already eaten when I got home. She'd already made plans. She'd already decided how she felt. I wasn't excluded dramatically. I was just no longer required. That night, her sentence wasn't cruel. That's what made it so sharp. It wasn't meant to hurt me. It was meant to clarify her position to herself. I just happened to be in the room. When she came back downstairs later, hair damp, wrapped in a towel, she glanced at me with mild curiosity, like she'd forgotten I was still there. "We can talk tomorrow," she said. "Not if you want, not are you okay. Just tomorrow. Scheduled, contained." I nodded then. Not because I agreed, but because I understood something important. The conversation she wanted tomorrow wasn't for me. It was for the role she needed me to play next. That was the moment I stopped trying to win back something that had already been replaced. I didn't leave the house. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't confront her phone or demand explanations. I did something quieter. I started paying attention. And once you see the truth clearly, it's impossible to unsee it. The next morning arrived without drama. No slammed doors, no confrontations, just the quiet choreography of 2 people who had learned how to move around each other without touching. She was already dressed when I came downstairs. Hair neat, coffee poured, phone beside her plate like a second utensil. She smiled at me the way you smile at a coworker you respect, but don't intend to know any better. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Yes," I said. It wasn't a lie. My body had rested. My mind had been awake for years. She nodded. satisfied, and launched into logistics. She had a meeting. She'd be late. There was chicken in the fridge if I wanted it. Everything was phrased as helpful, efficient, considerate. It struck me then that she had rehearsed this version of herself. Calm, reasonable, unburdened. There was no room in her tone for guilt, because guilt requires conflict. And she had already resolved hers. I didn't bring up the sentence. I didn't ask what she meant by pretending. I watched her instead. The way she checked her reflection in the microwave door, the way she angled her phone away when it lit up, the way she kissed my cheek without really aiming for it. More gesture than a connection. After she left, the house felt larger than it ever had. Not empty, reassigned. I moved through it slowly, noticing things I'd stopped seeing. The picture frame she'd rearranged so my side of the family was mostly out of view. The new throw pillows I didn't recognize. The drawer in her nightstand that no longer held anything of mine. I told myself not to speculate. Speculation is what keeps you stuck. Instead, I paid attention to facts. She was happier somewhere else. Not joyful, not glowing, just lighter, like someone who had already put something down. The days that followed confirmed what the night had suggested. She stopped pretending. I didn't notice. She just stopped pretending. Period. She took calls in the car. She texted openly but angled the screen. She dressed differently. Not more revealing, just more intentional. As if someone new was seeing her from angles I hadn't in years. We still ate dinner together sometimes. Those meals were the strangest. She talked about work. I listened. She laughed at stories that didn't need laughter. I realized then that she wasn't trying to hide an affair. She was phasing out a life. One evening she mentioned his name by accident. Just once, mid-sentence, corrected herself immediately, apologized quickly, too quickly. The way you do when you slip in front of someone you've underestimated. I didn't react. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't need to. The name landed in me with a dull familiarity, like I'd passed it on the street before without knowing why it stuck. Later that night, lying beside her, I understood something that hurt more than any proof could have. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of delaying herself. I had become a pause, a formality, a bridge she was already across. That's when the anger should have come. That's when I should have demanded answers, or searched through her phone, or confronted the shape of the truth. But anger requires belief that something can still be defended. What I felt instead was clarity. I saw my role clearly for the first time. I was the stable background that made her transition easier, the familiar weight that made the new thing feel lighter by comparison. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was her justification. And once you see that, you stop trying to be convincing. You stop auditioning for a part that's already been recast. So I stayed quiet, I stayed observant, and I began preparing myself not for confrontation but for separation, not the dramatic kind, the kind that happens internally long before anyone packs a bag. Because the truth was, by the time she said that sentence after midnight, she hadn't been talking to me at all. She'd been informing me of a decision that had already rearranged her life. And now that I finally understood that, I was done pretending too. Once I stopped pretending, everything slowed down. Time didn't rush anymore, and it didn't drag either. It just unfolded one ordinary moment at a time, each one quietly confirming what I already knew. I wasn't looking for evidence. I wasn't trying to catch her. That urge had passed. What replaced it was something colder and more useful. Understanding. She noticed the change before she understood it. I spoke less, not in a dramatic, wounded way. I just stopped filling silences that weren't mine to fill. When she talked, I listened without reacting. When she asked neutral questions, I gave neutral answers. The energy I used to spend monitoring her moods, adjusting myself to keep the peace, I redirected inward. That alone shifted the balance between us. One evening, she asked almost casually if everything was okay. The question wasn't concern, it was calibration. She needed to know whether the ground was still stable beneath her. I told her yes, and I meant it. Things were finally aligning with reality. She started staying out later, not excessively, just late enough to stop explaining. I learned the new rhythm of the house, the sound of the lock turning after midnight, the way she'd slip into bed already mentally elsewhere. Sometimes she'd fall asleep instantly. Other times she'd scroll on her phone, screen dimmed, thumb moving with practiced familiarity. I never looked over. That chapter was closed. What surprised me was how quickly my body adapted. The tension I'd lived with for years, the constant low-grade vigilance, began to ease. I slept better. I ate without that dull knot in my stomach. It was as if my system had been waiting for my mind to catch up. At work, people commented that I seemed different, more focused, less distracted. I realized how much of my attention had been leaking into a marriage that no longer existed in practice. Reclaiming it felt like regaining circulation in the limb you didn't realize had gone numb. There were moments that still cut, of course, small ones. She forgot an anniversary we'd never officially stopped celebrating. She canceled plans we'd made months earlier, citing something vague and immovable. She introduced me to someone at a social event with less certainty than before, her voice hesitating just long enough to register. Each time I felt it, acknowledged it, and let it pass. Pain, like information, doesn't have to be dramatized to be useful. One night she came home smelling different. Not perfume exactly, something warmer, closer. She went straight to the bathroom, showered longer than usual, and climbed into bed without a word. I lay there beside her, staring at the ceiling, and understood the final piece. It wasn't just emotional. It had crossed into the physical world. That knowledge didn't shatter me. It clarified the timeline. The strange part was how little I wanted to confront her. Confrontation would have forced her to perform remorse or defensiveness. It would have given her a chance to narrate the story in a way that preserved her self-image. I didn't want that version. I wanted the truth as it existed, not as it would be explained. So, I began to detach in practical ways. I organized my finances. I reviewed documents I hadn't looked at in years. I reconnected with parts of my life that had gone quiet, old friendships, old routines, not as an escape, but as a return. She sensed the shift again, more sharply this time. One evening, she said my name the way she used to when she wanted reassurance. I looked at her and realized I could still care without clinging. That was new. That was powerful. "You seem far away," she said. I almost smiled. Instead, I told her the truth. "I'm just seeing things clearly." She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't want clarity. She wanted continuity. And I finally understood that my calm wasn't invisible anymore. It was unsettling her because when someone stops reacting, stops chasing, stops trying to fix what they didn't break, the story changes. The roles shift. The illusion weakens. By then, I wasn't waiting for a confession. I wasn't waiting for proof. I was waiting for the moment when my internal distance became impossible for her to ignore. And I knew that moment was coming. The moment came on an ordinary Tuesday, which felt appropriate. No storms, no raised voices, just the quiet collapse of a structure that had already been hollowed out. She came home earlier than usual and found me in the living room, not distracted, not tired, just present in a way I hadn't been for a long time. She hesitated before speaking. That hesitation told me everything. People hesitate when they realize they're no longer in control of the narrative. "We need to talk," she said. I nodded, not permission. Acknowledgement. She sat across from me instead of beside me. Another small truth. She started with careful language, the kind meant to sound mutual. She talked about distance, about growing apart, about how things had changed slowly and no one was really at fault. She avoided specifics, avoided names, avoided responsibility. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her timeline. I didn't offer mine. At some point, she stopped and looked at me, visibly unsettled. "You're not saying anything." "I know," I said. "I already did my talking." That was when she understood, not that I knew about him, not even that I was leaving. She understood that I had already left internally, and she hadn't noticed. That realization shook her more than any accusation could have. She asked if I was angry. I told her no. Anger is a reaction. What I felt was resolution. She asked if there was someone else. I told her the truth again. No, I hadn't replaced her. I'd reclaimed myself. We didn't argue about details. There was no point. The facts existed whether we named them or not. She admitted enough to confirm what I already knew. Not everything. Enough. She cried then, briefly, more from the loss of certainty than the loss of us. I watched her and felt compassion without obligation. That surprised both of us. The separation that followed was quiet, efficient. We divided things with the politeness of people who no longer needed to punish each other to feel whole. Friends were confused. Some expected drama. Some waited for me to fall apart. I didn't. I had already done my breaking in private. Living alone felt strange at first. Too quiet, too honest. But gradually, the silence stopped feeling empty and started feeling clean. I noticed how little space I actually needed, how light my days felt without the constant effort of being misunderstood. Occasionally, she reached out not to reconcile, to check, to see if the version of me she remembered was still available if she ever needed it. I was kind. I was distant. I didn't reopen doors. I closed with intention. Months later, I ran into her by chance. She looked different, not happier, just more exposed. We exchanged a few words. She asked how I was. I told her the truth one last time. I'm steady. She nodded like someone finally hearing a language they should have learned years ago. Here's what I learned, and this is where I'll leave you. Betrayal doesn't always arrive as a shock. Sometimes it arrives as a sentence spoken calmly after midnight, when the speaker has already moved on. The real damage isn't the affair. It's the moment you accept a role that slowly erases you. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, pay attention not to their words, but to your silence. Sometimes the most powerful choice you can make is not to argue, not to chase, not to explain yourself to someone who has already decided who you are to them. If this story resonated with you, if you value stories that don't glorify chaos but honor clarity and self-respect, please subscribe. These stories are about recognizing the moment you stop pretending and start choosing yourself.